Okay, today we're going to start on Pei Gimel Amud Aleph. That's 83a. Starting in the middle of the page. Masnisa Tana Mishmeid Rabbi Akiva. It's like right in the middle of the page, one line above the middle. We thank Hashem that you're able to learn Torah every day. We're supposed to be learning. We should have the Beis Hamikdash. We learned in the Mishnah that Korban Torah can't come from Meiser. It has to come from Chulin. Can't bring Meiser. It can't be Meiser Shein. It has to come from Chulin. We had a source for that from Rabbi Eliezer that he learned it from the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach didn't come from Meiser, so two other Korbanos can't come from Meiser. Rabbi Akiva argued with that, and he said, "Done in Efsher Mishi Efsher by the Korban Pesach, there was no such thing as Meiser." So we're talking about Pesach Mitzrayim when they were in Egypt. So that can't be a source. Anyway, what is Rabbi Akiva's own teaching? The Gemara now says, there was a brisa that taught in the name of Rabbi Akiva. It does like this. Quoting the pasuk that we quoted yesterday, the pasuk says, these are the laws of all the sacrifices. And then we learned the halacha from each one, and then we said that all of these halachas apply to all the other karbanos. Each halacha applied to all the karbanos as well. So it goes like this. So what did we learn from the mincha? What was the first word of the pasuk? It says la'ila. Actually, la'ila. We're skipping la'ila. Go straight to the mincha. Ma mincha mekadeshes bebeluah. Kol mekadeshes bebeluah. Just like the mincha consecrates anything that it gets absorbed into, which now would lead it to have some restrictions on this new item that just absorbed the mincha. So too, any other sacrifice also will absorb. If it absorbs if something absorbs the sacrifice, will become consecrated. Now we already have this by achatas. We mentioned by achatas this law. It needs to write it by both chatas and by mincha, that an absorption of the korban into anything else will consecrate the other item, and then we'll have the restrictions of the time frame of how long you could eat it and what you could use it, right? Where it's allowed to go, food or to a vessel. If we would only say by a mincha because it's soft what it's absorbing. But by a chatas, maybe the actual chatas, which is meat, is not something that's soft. So maybe the absorption would be different. Because Rachman Machatas Mishum de Basar Agav the Shaman Kadir. Or maybe we should say the opposite. Maybe if it only be by a mincha, we would say that because it's greasy, because it's fatty, that the fat of the animal would get absorbed deeper into the other item. That's why it would become consecrated, but by the mincha, maybe not. Okay, we have different reasons to say that maybe the law should only apply to this and not to that. So therefore, we have it by both. By both, the law applies to both of them. Yeah. Outside of Shiloh, they found all the broken pottery excavation. They explained that why all the broken pots, because you had to break the pot. You weren't able to use it by a full earthenware vessel. You only had one day to eat the korban chatas. Following day, the vessel was like treif. It's nicer. Break the pots. The old-fashioned disposable was clay pots. So now we go to chatas. What do we learn from chatas? Well, chatas ain't a balam and a chulin, and this is actually our main point of quoting this whole entire brisa. Just like the chatas only comes from chulin, which means not unconsecrated animals. You have to it can't come from a meiser animal. So therefore, meiser sheni, right? It can't come from meiser sheni money. So also and also by yaim, you have to bring it by day. And also, biyadei haimanis, you have to use your right hand for the service of the sacrifice. Afkal, also every other sacrifice. Okay. Also, all the sacrifices also have to come from regular chulin money, not can't come by night. It has to be by day, and it also is with his right hand. Chatas kufa minalan. How do we know the chatas itself has this halacha that you're learning from the chatas over to everything else? Rav Chisda says in the pasuk, Bikr varnas para chatas ashaloi. Aaron brings the chatas that's his. He's talking about the sacrifice in Yom Kippur. It's his own sacrifice, right? Was the bull that he brings for his own family, and it has to come from his own money. It's come from his own money. Oh, that's so interesting. It's come from his own money. That means that also other karbanos also have to come from your own money, not from Meiser. It has to be his and not from Meiser. B'yoim, how do we know that it's by day? No, I'm sorry. It says b'yoim nafka, that we have other sources. You have another source for by day. Why do you have to tell me that we're learning it from chatas? Gemara says kedi naspa. That we were just adding in, not for any specific reason, but it turns out that we know it by a chatas as well. But you're right, we could have learned it from other places. B'yadei ha'yamanis midrava bar b'chana nafka. B'yadei ha'yamanis we also know from another source. What are you telling me we learned from chatas? We have another source. Gemara says kedi naspa. You're right, that wasn't actually necessary here, because we have other sources for this as well. Asham, we learned from the Asham, Ma Asham, Atzmaisav Mutar, and Kal Atzmaisav Mutar, just like by the Asham, you're allowed to eat what's inside the bones. So also, other sacrifice, you're allowed to eat what's inside the bones. Yeah. As opposed to the Korban Pesach. Okay. But here it says, Atzmaisav Mutarin means that you can make bone china out of the bones of a carbon. We had that Gemara before that mentioned this, right? Okay. Now the Gemara asks, going back to Rabbi Akiva argued with Rabbi Eliezer regarding a source for the carbon taida not coming from Chulin, and Rabbi Eliezer learned it from the pasuk that says "V'zavachta Pesach." Just like the carbon Pesach is only from things that weren't Chulin, so too, all other karbanos can only come from things. Only the carbon Pesach can only come from Chulin, not from Meiser. So too, all other karbanos can only come from Chulin. Now the Rabbi Kiva that argued on that, Rabbi Kiva Haivas Avachta Pesach, my Avidle. What does he do with the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer used to teach us that the carbon Pesach comes from Chulin? So to all other karbanos. So the Gemara says, "Mi ba'leilik to Rav Nachman." He's going to use it for something that Rav Nachman taught. Rav Nachman, Rav Baravur. Rav Nachman says, "Name of his father-in-law, Minayin Lamaisa Pesach Shekarav Shlamim." How do you know that a leftover Pesach or money that's left over from a carbon Pesach, because you designated money for it, and then it turned out it was a discount and you got it cheaper. So the money that's left over, what do you do with that money? So it says it's brought as a shlamim. How do we know that? Shenemar v'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem lekechat tzaynu bakar. It says you slaughter a Pesach to Hashem your God, sheep and cattle. Cattle. In Pesach b'olam and akvasim and yizim. Pesach doesn't come from cattle. Pesach comes from flock, sheep and goats, not bulls and oxen. So it's coming to teach us, rather, what it's coming to tell us is that actually what's left over from a carbon Pesach is going to be used for something that comes from flock and cattle, which is another term for shlamim. That's our source. that what's left over from a Pesach is Zavachta Pesach teaches me that what's left over from a Pesach is going to be brought as a shlamim, as a peace offering. Peace offering means that a piece of it goes to the kohen, a piece of it goes to the mizbeach, a piece of it goes to the, and that's how they make peace. Okay, like the Indian peace pipe. Okay. And here, this is our source for that. That you get that the korban Pesach, what's left over from the korban Pesach is a shlamim. We learn it from Shmuel's father. The pasuk says that if a person brings from sheep, from flock, he brings a shlamim sacrifice. And the Shmuel's father says, this comes to teach me that a sacrifice that comes from sheep, from flock, will be brought as a shlamim. What sacrifice comes from sheep? The Pesach. It's going to be brought as a shlamim, leftover. So now we have two sources for that a leftover korban Pesach is a shlamim. One is Zavachta Pesach, Tzayin Bakar. The other one is Imenat Tzayin Karbanil, Zavach HaShlamim. So it says, Vakati Mihachanafka, you think you only have two sources? I'll show you a third source. Me'asam Nafka. Vatanya Keves, the rabbi says, a Pesach la'aliyah. Shoimer, Im Keves, Lavi Pesach, Shavar Shnasai. Shlamim, Abai Machos Pesach, L'chol Mitzvah, Shlamim. Shittin, Nesmichin, Nesachin, Nifa Chazav Shaykh. Shoimer, Rimeis, Hifzakin, and Liman Aleishin, Tunali. Okay. So we have another source that says like this. Pasuk says, Keves, a lamb. To teach us that if you bring a lamb for the korban Pesach, then you're going to have to bring along the fat tail. It's also going to get put on the altar. When it says im keves, if it's a lamb, that's coming to tell me the rabbis that's coming to include a Pesach that the time passed over it. It got too old. It got too old. That you bring it as a shlamim, and also a shlamim, and any shlamim that comes because of a Pesach. Why does shlamim come because of a Pesach? It means that if you had leftover money from a korban Pesach, you bring it as a shlamim. It's coming to tell me that it's going to have all the halachas of shlamim. What does that mean? You have to lean on it. You have to bring the sachem on it. You have to wave the chest and the leg. Okay. And now it says when it says if you bring a shlamim as a goat, so then it's coming to separate and it's going to tell me that the goat does not have the fat tail, the halachas of another type of shlamim that don't come along with the fat tail. Which should also tell me that the Pesach that comes from an A's doesn't have the fat tail. Okay. What we see now is that we have three psukim, three sources for a leftover korban Pesach that it's brought as a shlamim. We had one that says V'zavachta Pesach. We had another one that says Imenat Tzayin. We have another one that says Imenat Tzayin. What's the third one? Keves. Im Keves. Im Keves. The Gemara answers this up. It says Slasa Kroiksir. We actually have three psukim. One of them is coming to tell me that let's say Pesach passed and you didn't bring it as a korban Pesach. And then not only that, you didn't bring it as a korban Pesach, but it's not even eligible anymore because it's over a year old. Korban Pesach has to be within its first year. So it's coming to tell me that animal is brought as a shlamim. The other one is that Pesach passed, but the animal would still be eligible if he would still be Pesach. Why? Because it's still in its first year. But but Pesach passed already, so oh well. Pesach passed. It's a shame because it's a good animal. And the next one is if it's still in its first year, and still you could bring it for Pesach. The only thing is you don't need it because you had extra money. You already brought your Pesach. So it's tricky. We need each of these to teach it to me. To teach me the halacha that is brought as a shlamim. If it would tell me that the time passed and also the year passed, that means it's not eligible because Pesach is over. It's not eligible because it's too old. Oh, it's not a Pesach anymore. There's no options. It's a shlamim. But let's say Pesach passed, but it's still eligible. The chazil Pesach sheni. Don't bring it as a shlamim. It could still be used as a Pesach sheni. A Malay, I would say that it goes as a Pesach sheni, not as a shlamim. So it's coming to teach me that it's also a shlamim. Question: why not? Why not? Why can't you use it as a Pesach sheni? If it would tell me that it's too old, that it's Pesach past, but it's still in its first year. Ditchli Pesach Rishon, that it can't be brought for Pesach Rishon. Why? Because it passed. I would have thought that if Pesach passed, so that's why the reason why you bring it as a shlamim. But let's say Pesach didn't pass, you could still use it now as a carbon Pesach, but you ended up bringing it as a shlamim. It was fit for Pesach Rishon because it's not Pesach yet. A Malaya could say that it's not a shlamim. Tzricha comes to tell me that no, it is a shlamim. We have a bunch of different scenarios where a carbon Pesach is not going to be used as a carbon Pesach, and nevertheless, in each of those different scenarios, it's going to be a shlamim. Whether it's because Pesach was over, whether because it was still before Pesach, you had an extra one, or whether it's because the animal's own passport was expired. It's over a year old. Yeah. We start a new parak. Whenever you have a carbon tzibur, or whether it's a carbon tzibur is a public sacrifice, or whether it's a private sacrifice, it comes from Eretz Yisrael, and it also comes from Chutz La'aretz. Doesn't matter. We were talking about a carbon mincha, right? The animal, I don't think would make a difference, but where the grain grew, that would be significant. And we're saying that it doesn't matter for almost all sacrifices, except for, we'll see in a moment, Min hachadash and min hayashin. You can bring it from the new grain. You can bring it from the old grain. There's no problem to use last year's grain for any carbon mincha. If you have a little storage, it's okay. Chutz min aimer shtei alechem, except for these two exceptions. The aimer, which is brought yesterday, brought on Shabbos this year, right? The 16th. No, the 16th was Friday. It was brought right the second day of Pesach. And the shtei alechem, which is brought on Shavuos. She'enim bo an element achadash min aretz. Has to be from the new grain, the brand new crop, and also it has to come from Eretz Yisrael. Kulanin bo an element of muvchar. They all have to come from the best grain. Beizim muvchar shalem. What is the best grain? Machnes bezatcha alpha l'seilas. These two areas, they have the best flour. What's that big company that everyone hates? Monsanto. It's the best. The best flour is this machnes and zatra. Lahavdal. Shniolem. The second best is aporium. Aphorium. Bika. There's this place called Aphorium, which is in the valley. Kalaratza say ksheris. They have a map. Okay. Machnes is the location is unclear. Zatcha is also unclear. And Afarim is mentioned in the Mishnah, and it's also unclear. Okay. But they do have a map that shows you where they don't know it is. So, okay. All areas was kosher. The only thing is that this was the best place they would bring it from these places. That was the extra mitzvah. Do it better. Our Mishnah doesn't fit with the following brisa, with the following Tana of the brisa. Tanya was taught in the brisa. Aimer, Habam, and Ayashan, kosher. But the Aimer that came from the old grain is kosher. You know that. Don't know anything about it. Is that why they make them thinner, but from the Ukraine? Why is the Eretz Yisrael matzah so thick and the Ukraine matzah thin? Because they have better rollers, or is it because the grain is different, water's different? You know, there were some coffee shops that they claimed that the reason why their coffee was so good was because they had a better filter on the water. Anyway, whatever the case is, Oimer, which comes from Oimer, that comes from the old grain, is still kosher according to the Brisa. Shtei alechem habayis min hayashan is also ksheris. 2 loaves of bread that come from the old grain is also kosher. Ela shechiser mitzvah. The only thing is you're missing out on. You could have done it a better mitzvah, but you didn't do it, so you're missing in the mitzvah. But nishkeferlach still doesn't ruin the validity of the sacrifice. It's still acceptable. Oimer, where do we know this from? Oimer diksiv takerbes minchas bikurecha. It says you should bring your first mincha. Even if you're bringing it from the attic. Aliyah means the attic. What does it mean, the attic? It means that you stored grain in the attic from last year. Still bring that grain. It says, from your dwelling places, you should bring it. Okay. And that means, that you can't bring it from chutzlaretz because that's not your dwelling place. But your dwelling place means that it could even be from the attic. It means it was last year's grain. Okay, so that goes against what we learned in our Mishnah that says that the Aimer has to come from the new grain and the Shtei Alechem. The Gemara says, you're telling me, Mashvisechem Taviyu is teaching me that you could bring it from the attic, you could bring it from Chutzlaretz. We already used this pasuk. What did we use it for? Back on Daf Ayin Zayin, we learned Amar Taviyu. I think this question should really go together. Let's see how they write it down. Yeah, goes together. Didn't you already say that Taviya filam in Aliyah? How could you tell me that this is coming to teach me that you could even have the old crop? The Gemara is continuing. The Gemara is continuing the question. Okay. What happened? So 1 second, we already used this pasuk. The pasuk said, and you're telling me it's coming to tell me Taviyu is coming to tell me that you can even bring from last year's grain. I mean, because we learned from this that Maseches Menachos Taviyu the breads of a carbon taida are nisaran, just like the shtei alechem. Shtei alechem was each loaf was one nisaran. So to the breads of a carbon taida, each loaf was going to be one nisaran. Now we had 10 loaves. It was going to be 10 nisaran. What's 10 nisaran? Means an ephah. The bottom of Pei Gimel Amud Beis. Yeah. And jump to today's 85. We're on 80, which is turning to 84. So you already used this pasuk to teach me something else, that a carbon taida is going to be a 10 israinus, which means a full ephah just for the chametz, and there's going to be another ephah just for the matzah. So you use this pasuk already. Now you're telling me the pasuk is being used to teach me min aliyah, that you can bring it from last year's grain. It says imkain lichtav krat tavi, my taviyu shma min atarti. So we derive from the vav at the end of taviyu makes it you all, makes it a plural. You all should bring. Could have said tavi, you shall bring. Didn't have to say you all should bring. It's coming to teach me an extra halacha that you also could bring it from last year's grain. Okay. Vaksiv reish. Okay, vaksiv reishis, but it says it's supposed to be the first. You're telling me it could be the old grain? It says la mitzvah. It's supposed to be the first, but that doesn't mean it's going to be invalid if it's not. Vaksiv chadasha, but it says the mincha chadasha. It says the chadash is teaching me something else. We have a brisa that says Reb Nassan and Rabbi Akiva Amru. Reb Nassan and Rabbi Akiva both said. An interesting combination. Reb Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov. Amru. Nassan and Rabbi Yaakov. Amru. Shtei alechem abayis min hayashan ksheres. Mani mekayim chadasha, shtei chadasha l'chol menachos. What it means is like this. No. Kiva would be older. One generation. Over here it says that what do I do with the word chadasha? It doesn't have to be chadasha. It says that you could bring the omer from the old grain as well. So why does it say chadasha? It says chadasha, that means that this is the first one that comes. After this, you could already actually it's the shtei alechem. Chadasha by the shtei alechem. It says
first
chadasha.
one in line after shtei.
So what happens is that the shtei alechem is even if the shtei alechem is not from the new grain, but it still is the first for any other mincha that's going to be brought from the new grain. In other words, I can't bring the new grain before the shtei alechem, even if the shtei alechem itself isn't the first, but there's nothing that comes before it. Okay. What's wrong? I have new grain.
The shtei lechem
Was brought on
comes
Shavuos.
from the new grain.
It's supposed to be the new grain, but if you didn't bring them to the new grain, this brisa holds that it's kosher anyway. Why does it say it's new? It says it's the new that after this you can already bring other menachos new. So it means that it's new.
Oh, see,
So
I
you can't do
understood
it
it that
before
you
that.
couldn't bring any menachos until you brought the shtei lechem. Then
Right.
once you brought the shtei lechem, then everything else can even.
Right. That's what we're saying. Same
That
thing.
is what you said.
Yeah. So the Gemara says we have a brisa that seems to argue with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that it needs to be new, and the brisa says it doesn't need to be new. So it says Ad kan leifligi ela b'chadash. This machlekes was only about if it has to be the new grain or if it can be the old grain. Aval ba'aretz leifligi daimer shtei alechem me'aretz in b'chus la'aretz lei. Everyone agrees you can't bring grain from outside of Eretz Yisrael for the Omer or for the Shtei Alechem. It needs to be grown in Eretz Yisrael. Come on. Like whom? Who does this go like? The Leiki Aitana. This also doesn't fit with our our Mishnah and our Brisa don't fit with a third Brisa. It says the Tanya was taught in a Brisa. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Aimer, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda holds Aimer ba michutz laaretz. That the Aimer can come from chutz laaretz. Mani makayim kisavayo laaretz. So why do you say when you come into the land? If you don't need to come into the land, it says no. Doesn't mean that the grain has to come from the land. It means that when did the obligation start? That's only after the Jewish people settled the land. When we came into the land. Once we came into the land, then we had the obligation. But it doesn't mean that once we're in the land, we have to buy our grain for the Omer from Eretz Yisrael. You can get it from outside as well. Savar. See, this concept of Chadash and Yashan is a new concept for us in America. Because before we're storing grain. We're storing grain for years, and so we never had the issue. We're always using old grain. Then we started to supply other countries grain, and then we were actually using the new grain. We had to rethink the halachas. I remember in I don't know when it started, but I remember in like maybe fifth grade, where my teacher was telling us that you have to be careful now because America is supplying grain to other countries. And now we have to be careful with Yasha.
So when there are, if you're not buying in a bakery, let's say you're in Publix, bread or something that is only you wanted, that doesn't mean it's Yashan, or that is Yashan because then they couldn't give you the
No, they're not makbid. They're not makbid on that. Yeah, that's a separate thing. The kashrus organizations rely on the heter. They'll put a kosher symbol on it, even if it's chadash. And how do you find out? They have these apps where you put in the serial number of the oatmeal, and it'll tell you what crop it is. That one. Arla? I don't know about that. No. 3 years? Uh-huh. So, yeah, so maybe there's a way of telling, I don't know, but that would, Shemitah is only in Eretz Yisrael. So you would have to know from what year it was. Yeah, but fruits are always going to be that year, right? Last year's fruits. Wine, maybe wine.
He's thinking about Shemitah year when you have to make sure that thing that was imported was not. Every year, every time there's a Shemitah year, we get this warning. Don't buy fruits from Israel,
right?
Unless somehow you know that.
On the eggs, on the egg carton, there's a number. And that number starts with January 1st. It tells you which day of the year that the eggs were made. You know that? There's a number on the egg carton. The number is which day of the year. So you can actually, you have to count what January 1st, 2nd, February would be, 31, 32, 33. You're working your way through the year. And then you have to get to April or whenever Pesach is. You have to see if the eggs were there, because there's a problem with buying eggs in the middle of Pesach, because the grain that they ate. So we buy our eggs in milk. Eggs and milk we buy before Pesach. But let's say you do need to buy eggs. So, but if it was laying before Pesach, then it's good. It's no problem. So you can check by the number, the serial number on the egg carton. It is hummus. No, it doesn't have to do with washing eggs. It has to do with what they ate. Yeah. Anyway, so No, no, just look at the number.
I bought enough for
Yeah, enough.
I don't need to lose anymore. What do you want me to do?
I'm saying this, just the answers usually, don't eat that.
Uh,
Don't eat that.
Any fool could just say no, no, no.
right.
Trying to find
Okay,
it.
so what, the Yashan app?
Yes, what's it
Yeah,
called?
Yashan something, yeah. Some Ki Savayu al Aretz. Yeah, there's valid heterim, so it's not like everyone has to keep. I mean, it's the valid reason to keep yashan, but there's also valid heterim. The people, there was a rabbi that came to Miami. He said anyone that doesn't keep yashan, it's pasaledus. You can't use him for a minion. You can't use him for
And
the
they
sign on a thing.
him for Edis.
People get very like superiority type things, Yeah, but I mean, we're not makbid on it, but it doesn't mean that it's not a good thing, It's yeah. It would be sort of like, if the Rebbeim weren't makbid on it, so it's not like something I have to jump to do, but if I want to do it, it's but we'll say like Chabad is careful on lashon hara. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. There's a machlekes in the Tanoim, and there's a machlekes in the Shulchan Aruch, and there's a machlekes. It exists. It's a real thing. Okay. So, where are we holding? Rabbi Yehuda says that it has to come from. He says that that the Aimer can come from Chutz. So what do I do with it? It says Kisavay Olaris. That means that just when you come into the land, now you're chayiv. Kasavar, listen to this. Kasavar chadash b'chutz la'aretz deraisa. That's what we're getting into this. He holds, Rabbi Yehuda holds that chadash and chutz la'aretz is a deraisa. Very strict opinion. That says we have to wait for Pesach before we start eating the new grain. And now, the ksiv Moshe V'seichem. It says from your dwelling places. Kol makom shatim yeshem mashma. Moshe V'seichem doesn't mean Eretz Yisrael. Moshe V'seichem means your dwelling place, means even places that aren't Eretz Yisrael, anywhere where you dwell, even if it's Miami. You have to be careful with Chadash. And now, Kisavayu is Zaman Bihu. When you come into the land, Kivan Deiraisu Akruvinam Akrivan. Kisavayu El Aretz, when you'll come into the land, you can bring the Aimer from anywhere. Since Chadash is Daraisa everywhere in the world, so too the Aimer could be brought from anywhere in there, because the Aimer is being matir the Chadash. If Chadash was only a din in Eretz Yisrael, then the grain would need to come from Eretz Yisrael. The Aimer would need to come from Eretz Yisrael. But since the Chadash is Aser everywhere, therefore the Aimer can come from everywhere. Okay. Given the rest of Krivanam Makrivan. Okay. Tanan Hasam. Yeah, we learned over there in a Mishnah. Shaimrei Svichen Bashvias Neitlan Scharan Michumas Alishka. This is talking about there's grain that grows in Shemitah, but not because it was plowed and planted, sown. It was just because it grew wild. Last year, when they harvested the grain, there's some seeds that fell as you're pulling the grain in, so it's going to grow and it's going to turn it. You'll get grain. So that's going to be you're going to have to get the Eimer from the grain that just grew wild. Problem is that the grain on Shemitah that grows wild is ownerless. Anyone can go and take it. So they're going to have to set up watchmen that are going to watch the grain to make sure that we'll have grain ready for the Eimer. Where do they get their payment from? Who pays these watchmen? So it says they get the payment from Trumas Alishka, from the Machzis shekel, the money that went for the community sacrifices. That also goes to pay these watchmen that have to watch the grain. Rami Bar Chama Rav Chisda. Rami Bar Chama asked the question to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda is his father-in-law. He says, Tanan, Shemer Svichin B'Shviyas, Neitel Tzar Mitzumas Alishka. You're telling me a Mishnah that says that the people that watch the wild grain that goes for the Omer, and they have to watch it to make sure that the people don't come and take it, that they get a payment from Chumas Alishka. Ramino Lachla V'Leila Shreifa. How are you allowed to take the Omer from Shemitah grain? What do you do with the Omer? It's a carbon. You have to do a kaimetz and you have to burn it on the mizbeach. The pasuk says la'achla, that the grain that grows is meant to be eaten. You're not allowed to burn it. Shemitah grain is not allowed to be burnt. It has to be eaten. Amarlei, so Rav Chisda is back. Rachman amar lach l'darisechem v'atamar tibatal. The Torah says that you're supposed to bring a carbon, and you're telling me that we're going to neglect it. Amarlei mi kamina natibatal. Am I telling you that you should neglect it? I'm telling you, bring last year's grain. You don't have to deal with this year's grain. This year's grain, you have a problem with burning it. Last year's grain, you don't have a problem with burning it. It says, Bina Carmel, Valaka. But I need to have the soft grain. Bring last year's soft grain. Amrika Carmel Tarkiv. It says, no, you should bring it soft. Not get the grain, not what it was. Remember this, with the soup. The guy that went to what soup is this? It says it's bean soup. Says, I don't care what it's been. So I don't want last year's soft grain. Bina caramel taka, bina karbal b'shasa krava v'laka. It needs to be soft when you're bringing it. Okay. Itma, we have a machlekes now. Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yechanan caramel taka. Rabbi Elazar mereshus katzircha. Reishis katzircha v'lei seif katzircha. So why don't we bring last year's grain? Rabbi Yechanan says you can't bring last year's grain because it says caramel. It has to be soft when you bring it. Rabbi Elazar says the reason I can't bring last year's grain is because it has to be the first of the crop. If you bring last year's, then it's not the first. It's the end. Right? Reishis katzircha v'lei seif katzircha. It can't be the end, it has to be the first. Ma'isiv Rabba. Right? Rabba has a question. It's going to end up asking this. It's a nice long question. It's going to come out to be a question on Rabbi Yechanan. It says like this. Im takar minchas bikurim. If you'll bring, or when you'll bring the minchas bikurim. The minchas aimer chasam medaber. We're talking about the minchas aimer. Bikurim over here means the first of the grain. Me'echaniba, what do you bring it from? Minasayim, bring it from barley. All this is a brisa. Atar minasayim enol melachitim. You say it's barley, maybe it's wheat. Rabbi Elazar says, Nemer of Mitzrayim and of Ledairis. It says the spring in Mitzrayim, right? It says by the plague of the hail, uses the word spring. Also says spring for all generations. Just spring. It says that was ripening. Right? That was talking about barley. Also, when it says the spring, it says the spring. It's referring to the barley. He says, well, Rabbi Kiva says we find that there's an individual sacrifice that comes from wheat, and there's an individual sacrifice that comes from barley. Tibur also has an individual Tibur means a public community sacrifice. As from wheat, it also has a public sacrifice from barley. If you're going to say that the aimer comes from wheat, then we're not going to have a public sacrifice from barley, and we want it to be comparable to the private sacrifice, which also has wheat and barley. There's another pshat. If you're going to say that the aimer comes from wheat, then the shtei alechem aren't going to be the first of the sacrifices, because you already brought the aimer as the wheat. Shtei alechem would be the second one coming from the wheat. Alma mishum bikurim. What do we see? That our concern with the shtei alechem is that it needs to be the first, not because it needs to be caramel. So you have to kasha and Rabbi Yechanan. Yechanan said it needs to be caramel, but really we're seeing that it doesn't need to be caramel, right? That's not the main point. The main point is that it needs to be the first. Okay, let's leave it over here by Tanan Hassam on the bottom of Pei Daled.
Thank you.
Okay, page and a half.
Have a good day. Good night.
Wasn't it known that I had to be part?
It doesn't say clearly in the text that it has barley. It just says aviv.
You know, Paro said. Paro